Welcome to the story and welcome to Friday. You know, all week we've been talking about the cultural differences in eastern Oregon. Tonight we're going to take a look at a particularly touchy issue, wolves. Many on the west side of the state, where there are few, love them. Many on the east side, where there are many, hate them. Wolves returned to Oregon for the modern era in 2008. That was more than 60 years after the last one was shot and killed for bounty. They were not brought into the state, but rather allowed to wander in from neighboring Idaho, protected under the Federal Endangered Species Act. In just 3 years, the federal government found that enough gray wolves had returned to eastern Oregon that they could be taken off the endangered species list there. In 2015, the state of Oregon took wolves off the state endangered species list as well, although there are still restrictions on killing the animals. By the end of 2021, the state reported at least 21 different wolf packs in Oregon, with at least 175 members. This map from Oregon Fish and Wildlife shows where most of the packs are now located. See the upper right-hand corner of the state? That's where most are found, and that's where we are headed. We'll drive 100 miles north and east from John Day in a snowstorm to reach a tiny town called Medical Springs. It's on the edge of Union County and is home to thousands of cattle. We've come to eastern Oregon to talk about the urban-rural divide and the frustration driving the Greater Idaho movement. 11 counties have voted to start talking about moving the border with Idaho to leave Oregon and become part of Idaho. It's doubtful that will ever really happen, but it shows lots of people out here feel ignored by the big cities, which have significantly higher populations and therefore all the political power. The urban areas can decide what they think is best for everyone, and the rural areas just have to live with it. And that includes wolves.
I'm not a biologist here, but it seems to me like there's 3 packs here around this area. And it's breeding season right now, so you tell me what the wolf numbers are going to look like here in another few months when those females have pups.
Coleman Lay is a 30-year-old rancher.
I am the 6th generation, and my son is the 7th. My great-great-great-grandfather homesteaded up the road about 7-8 miles, about 125 years ago, and built a family here, and I'm the tail end of them, I guess. And my little boy and little girl are the 7th, so.
He has a degree in marketing and supply chain management from Boise State and loves this land and his herds of cattle. I visited during calving season. He has 1,000 mama cows, as he calls them. The moms of these 2 little ones did not survive. Coleman showed me how to give one a bottle of warm milk. When we were finished, I learned that around hungry calves, it's best to keep your guard up.
I think you're about done there, pal. Will they just stop or shall I pull it out?
You'll hear, did you hear that air kind of go out? Yeah, that one's done.
Oh. A shot to the to say thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry. That's all I got.
A good lesson for a reporter from the city.
Really?
As I recovered, Coleman talked about the Greater Idaho movement.
The Greater Idaho movement, to me, is more of the fact that there's just so many people who are so tired of, not having a say. They're like, hey, my life is basically being dictated by a completely other side of the state that has nothing, that really has no clue what we're dealing with over here.
During the birthing season, Coleman spends long days checking on the young calves. He tells me this one is fine, that one is too. While Coleman's working with the cattle, he has one predator that he worries about all the time, the wolves. And around here, it's not a theoretical concern. In early February, wolves came right here to his home and attacked and killed his dog. He shared this picture with us. We're blurring out most of it. It's too disturbing to show. He said ODFW biologists inspected the remains of his dog, named Dodge, and confirmed he'd been killed by wolves. Coleman said it happened overnight while he slept. Obvious question, but I'm sure you miss your dog.
Yeah, I miss him every day.
It's not the first time wolves have attacked here. Coleman shared this picture of a cow killed by wolves and said there are others. The state does allow some pushback. In late February, ODFW approved the killing of 2 wolves near Medical Springs after 3 documented attacks in pasture lands. On top of that, 3 more wolves have been legally killed in eastern Oregon this year for attacking livestock.
Yeah, this is a major problem. Like, I don't feel safe with going on walks with my dogs. I don't feel like my family, like I got to have an eye on them at all times.
Coleman turned to Facebook to share news of his dog's death.
But it was more of the fact I wanted to post that to realize, like, hey, this is what we're dealing with. Like, we're really struggling. Like, you know, there might be some folks that hear or see of a dead cow picture. You know, they're like, hey, the wolves killed that cow. They're like, well, so what? I don't have cows. Cows are cows. That's kind of what happens out west. Cowboys deal with wolves all the time. That's just what happens. But then when you add a picture of a dead dog on your page or whatever, they're like, wow, that resonates with a lot more people, because it's, you know, it's family pets, dogs, cat, like, you know, they're not going to discriminate. If they bet you anything, if they found one of the barn cats, you know, right up on the hill, like they're gonna kill it, you know. So it's just gaining some more awareness to what's truly going on.
But you were saying there were some haters too.
Oh yeah, there's some people that, you know, that almost think that a wolf has more right to live than you or I. Like, and I had it firsthand. Like, they, you know, some of the nasty comments you'll get, and, you know, I get some of these people are just sitting behind a computer acting tough or whatever. They're going to come, you know, kill your family or whatever if you ever harm a wolf. And
have you had threats like that?
oh yeah, and it's, you know, I don't, usually their names like Wolf Lover 242 or something like that.
There is a wolf kill compensation fund set up by the state legislature in 2011. It's a mixture of state and federal tax money that pays for prevention measures to protect livestock from wolves. It also pays for animals that are dead or hurt or missing. In 2022, the fund paid $393,682 for wolf attacks and prevention. The payout since the fund began totals $1,187,000. That's not much comfort for ranchers like Coleman Lay, who wishes Oregon's leaders on the west side of the state knew what it was like to live with wolves on the east side. Soon, he'll take his cattle up into the hills to graze on the edge of the stunning Eagle Cap wilderness, and he'll be in the middle of wolf country.
There's just so many wolves in one specific area, and people probably already know, I don't like wolves, but I also see my opinion's not the only one that matters. So what I am asking or saying is too much of anything is not good. If we have way too many wolves in one area, there needs to be ways or avenues ranchers or outdoorsmen or sportsmen alike can finally have to limiting numbers.
Just today, by the way, the state of Oregon put out an update on wolves around Medical Springs. At one point, it appeared there were 2 packs attacking livestock in the area and in a place called High Valley, which is just a bit to the north. Well, the state now says it's actually one group. They've named the wolves the Black Pines Pack. By the way, wolf supporters point out that wolves are vital for regulating populations like deer and elk. And thanks to a ruling by a federal judge last year, wolves are again covered by the Federal Endangered Species Act in Central and Western Oregon. In the meantime, as we think about solutions to bridging the urban-rural divide, some of you have offered some really interesting suggestions. For example, Ken writes, our Oregon Senate makeup could be changed to have 1 senator from each county. The United States Senate has 2 senators from each state. I wonder why Oregon has this unfair Senate representation to give more weight to the population centers. Well, that is an interesting point, Ken. Let's dig into that for a minute. First, the issue of why Oregon's legislature gives more weight to the population centers, the big cities. Most of Oregon's population is grouped in the greater Portland area and in the Willamette Valley and Eugene. This is a map from Portland State Population Research Center. Each dot here represents 46 people. Each color is a different race. Those dots pretty much paint the picture of where people live and where the political power lives as well. Things are pretty thin over there on the eastern part of the state. Oregon's legislature is set up so that each person elected to the state house represents 70,621 people. There are 60 representatives in Oregon, way more on the west side of the state than on the east side. The people elected to the state Senate, they each represent 141,242 people. Oregon has 30 senators. So you can see why the west side is so heavily represented. There are just way more people. In fact, political scientist Jim Moore sent me information showing that in eastern Oregon, there are just 5 senators and 9 House reps, just 14 members out of the legislature that has a total of 90. So that's why folks in eastern Oregon feel like they have no political power. It's because they have no political power. So what about that idea to scrap the population-based metrics for the state Senate at least, and just have one senator from each county? Well, here's Professor Moore.
Well, that's a great idea, except for one fatal flaw. The Supreme Court of the United States has said you can't do that. Up until the mid-1960s, states were actually fairly free in how they distributed how many senators there were and where they came from, how many representatives there were, where they came from. And it was pretty common in a lot of places to have at least one representative or senator from every county. Okay, so great stuff. But the Supreme Court looked at that in the 1960s and in a couple of rulings said, no, you can't do that because the Constitution says one person, one vote.
Which might leave you saying, well, now hold on. What about the U.S. Senate? Well, you are correct. The framers of the Constitution worried about this very issue. And that's why the Senate is the way it is. Way back in 1787, during the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, the more populated states said the number of reps and senators for each state should be based on the number of people living in their states. Well, that would give the big states more power, but they argued they deserved that more power because they contributed more money and more defense to the nation. The smaller states, though, they weren't buying that. They objected and they demanded equal representation in the Senate. And it went back and forth for a couple of months. But then finally, on July 16th in 1787, the sides agreed to a compromise. The House would be based on the size of the state. The Senate, though, would get 2 members from every state, and financial members could only start in the U.S. House. So it does seem kind of odd that 173 years later or so, the Supreme Court would say you can't use the same system. So is there another way?
Before partisanship became as strong in Oregon, the way that you did that is you made coalitions within the Oregon legislature. You also worked in other ways. For instance, there's something called the Association of Oregon Counties. All the county commissioners are part of it. That used to be a real hotbed of ideas that were then implemented in counties or went to the legislature to become state law. But with partisanship becoming so strong, it's become Republicans and Democrats.
Which, to those of you who enjoy history, will know that's something that our founding president, George Washington, cautioned against during his farewell address in 1796. He warned our nation not to give in to partisan bickering, that it would weaken the Union. How do you think we're doing? Now, let's take a look at some of your comments on our series before I give you my opinion on all this. Let's start with Steve in Clackamas County, who brings up another aspect of this greater Idaho movement that he says would affect folks across the state.
Another point that should be brought out is the recreational aspect of Eastern Oregon. I'm a hunter and a hiker and an outdoorsman, and if we move to Idaho, we will lose all our resident hunting rights, and we'll also be charged out-of-state fees for non-resident hunting, which are very, very steep. So, I'm not ultra-conservative, not ultra-liberal, but I am an Oregonian, 3rd generation, and this is just a bunch of nonsense, okay? We need to take care of these people, and we need to do the right thing. Thanks for your...
Another theme from what we've seen over the past few days is how some of you perceive this movement to be less about politics and more about race. Jason says, giving this movement the air that you are giving it is lending something absurd to a degree of legitimacy. You are, in effect, feeding the trolls. And in this case, these trolls are actually advocating for this movement out of nothing other than an inherent desire to form an even more white region. In the end, That's what all of this is actually about. But Lee has a different thought. The people of Eastern Oregon are simply tired of all the Portland politics. It's not some far-right movement. The left thinks everyone should think like them, or you're a far-right extremist. That is so far from the truth.
And I want to tell you that I am enjoying very much the discussion over East and West Oregon and a possible divorce. I've been here about 15 years. I tend to agree with East Oregon.
And how about this from Mike last night? I live in Medford and am not in favor of Greater Idaho. Why? Because Idaho deserves better. Oregon sucks. Instead, I would encourage people to leave Oregon. I know it's not easy, but thousands are doing that. I'm leaving too. Closed on our house sale today. Bye-bye, or okay. We certainly got our fair share of comments just like that from Mike, but let's end things on a lighter note.
I just wanted to say that I have found your series on Eastern Oregon extremely interesting and helpful, and made me realize a lot of things I did not know. It just seems that we could make a few slight changes that would help Eastern Oregon. Eastern Oregon and Multnomah County have very different problems.
And Bob says, I wanted you folks at KGW to know that providing a brief series discussing the Greater Idaho notion really has had an impact on me. I'm suddenly aware of a need to seriously consider the differences in lifestyles and recognize that the folks to the east have got to be given more of a voice in our state government. And there's this from Sue. I am a Multnomah County voter who now plans to take a road trip to Eastern Oregon, including John Day. This series made me think. I appreciate the thoughtful comments of my fellow Oregonians. And finally, there is this from Bill. More than ever, we need this kind of conversation to get a better understanding of each other and how we really feel. That's the great thing about the story. It always feels more like a conversation rather than a news story. Thanks for that, Bill. That's what we're trying to do here on our show. We want to take you to a new place, give you a new perspective, make you think new thoughts, maybe learn something that you didn't understand about a complex topic that affects you or your loved ones. We're not a traditional news show. We try hard not to be traditional. And finally, here's my opinion on all this. First off, if you somehow missed my nightly statements on Greater Idaho, I don't believe it's ever going to happen. And it's nowhere near reaching a point where it's formally approved by anyone. Yes, there is a bill to get things going in the Idaho legislature, and it did pass one side of the legislature, but looks like it's dead on the other side. In Oregon, there's also a bill supporting the idea, but it is also dead. And nothing will happen until both legislatures agree and pass a bill, and then both governors would have to sign off on the bill, which also is not going to happen, and then Congress would have to approve it, which really is not going to happen. So everybody, just take a breath. The reason we went to Eastern Oregon is because people there feel belittled and ignored and dismissed. Now, whether you think those are valid feelings or not is not the point. They do feel that way, and they deserve to be respected and heard. I appreciate the fact that each person I spoke with trusted me enough to tell me what they were really feeling about this urban-rural divide and how the rest of us might help out with that a little bit. One of the biggest things, they hate citizen initiatives created and passed by people who live right here in Multnomah County that are implemented across the state. Things are different in John Day than Portland. They don't think they should have to live under rules created to address problems in the big city. And I think they're right. Somebody suggested limiting citizen initiatives to the county where they start. I think that's an interesting idea. Have a problem in Multnomah County that the state legislature is ignoring? Great. Write an initiative and fix the problem in Multnomah County. Now, we got a ton of feedback from you on these reports, hundreds of emails and voicemails. Thank you. It shows that you care. Some of you are understanding, and some of you ridiculed those living out east. I think that's part of the problem. We need to listen with empathy and understanding, not judgment. Let's find the places where we agree and compromise in the places where we don't. Maybe you ought to get in your car, take a road trip out east, spend some money at the local businesses, get to know some of the people who live out there. I think you'll be impressed. I know I was. It's not us versus them. It's us versus us. This problem's been growing for a long time here in Oregon. I think we should each consider what we can each do to help make things better. That's my opinion anyway. What's yours? You don't have to agree with me, although the voice in my head says, yeah, but you should. But you should also communicate. Send me an email, will you? The address is thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave a voicemail. It's 503-226-5090. I look forward to hearing from you. And if you've missed any of our Greater Idaho series, you can watch them right now on our streaming channel, KGW+. It can be found on Roku or Amazon Fire. Add it to your homepage so you can watch segments or full episodes of the story anytime you want. You can also head to the KGW YouTube channel to find our content. It's updated every single weekday. When the story comes back,
our kids are chefs, and they're going to fry them up for us.
I'm going to keep one as a pet.
For the first time in nearly a decade, a fishing season that lasted a mere 7 hours brought hundreds of people to the banks of the Sandy River.
It's a circus.
The fatty fish they were after, and how those fish got the nickname candlefish. It's far more literal than you might think. When the story returns. Something unusual happened Thursday. The banks of the Sandy River were packed with hundreds of people taking the opportunity to net some fish you don't get to fish very often in Oregon. It's the Pacific Smelt. They returned to the river in large enough numbers to allow for recreational fishing for the first time since 2015. The season this time lasted 7 hours. Environmental reporter Cale Williams had the best assignment of the day yesterday, and he brings us his story.
For the first time in nearly a decade,
It's quite a scene.
the dip nets are out,
It's a circus.
and the smelt are swimming on the Sandy River. And that brought hundreds of people out on Thursday to dip their nets and pull in some of the fatty fish. Smelt were listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act in 2010. And though they often return to the Columbia, this is the first time there have been enough of them in the Sandy to allow for fishing since 2015.
So these fish 3 to 5 years ago probably came and spawned in the Columbia, lower Columbia, and this is a sign that things were right in the ocean for smelt to come back.
That's Ben Walzak, a fish biologist with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. He said the return of the smelt are a sign that conservation efforts are having an impact.
On the Sandy, there's been a lot of habitat restoration work, like upstream from where we are and downstream in the Delta.
The smelt run on the Sandy was once almost an unofficial holiday in the area. As many as 5,000 people would stream to Troutdale when the run started, dipping nets to snag the fish and lining the Stark Street Bridge to watch the spectacle. There weren't quite that many people out on Thursday, but Tim Swift brought out his grandson Braden to see what the fuss was all about.
He knows what he's doing, but this is a new experience.
It's really fun, and I love being outdoors and doing stuff like this with my grandpa.
Smelt is an extremely fatty fish, so much so that they're sometimes called candlefish because once they're dried, you can stick a wick in them and burn them like a candle. But all that fat makes for some good eating, too. That's according to Mondi Johnson, who came up from Boring to snag some smelt.
Our kids are chefs, and they're going to fry them up for us.
But beyond that, it's just a fine way to spend a Thursday afternoon.
Good wholesome activity.
And while everyone on the river seemed to be having a blast, it wasn't clear that everyone knew exactly why they were there.
I'm going to keep one as a pet.
The smelt had come to the river to spawn, and they usually only live for a couple days after they lay their eggs. Hundreds of dead smelt already started washing up downriver earlier this week. And that's why the smelt season was probably one of the shortest fishing seasons in Oregon this year. It was only open from noon to 7 on Thursday, and if you missed your chance, you're going to have to wait until the next time smelt make an appearance. For Walzak, though, the short smelt season on the Sandy, it was a sign that his work is having an impact.
It's pretty gratifying. You know, it's like one of those things you work your whole career for.
Cale Williams, KGW News.
Does look like fun. Keep sending your questions and comments to the story at kgw.com. By the way, it's the final day of our great food drive. We'll tell you how many meals you've helped provide when we come back.
On KGW News at 6:30, murder charges are filed in the disturbing deaths of a Vancouver mother and child. The clues that led police to the mother's boyfriend. Plus,
Kia's negligence has turned my car into a weapon.
Her stolen car was involved in a serious crash. Now this Portland woman and top state officials are pushing the car makers to make a change. That's next at 6:30.
Well, it's the final day of the KGW Great Food Drive, and you helped us reach our goal of providing 2 million meals. Thank you for giving all month long. Your donations support the Oregon Food Bank's distribution network of 21 regional food banks and more than 1,000 partners in Oregon and Southwest Washington. Still not too late to give if you still want to help out. You can just visit kgw.com/food drive. We also want to thank Rivermark Community Credit Union, Pacific Office Automation, Safeway, and local Toyota dealers for helping support this year's food drive. And hey, before we go, we want to ask your opinion on wearing masks in healthcare settings. On Monday, the mask mandate ends in Oregon and Washington. Some hospitals are still going to ask you to wear masks, others giving you the choice. So what do you think about that? Send us an email, will you? The address is kgwthestory@kgw.com, or you can call and leave us a voicemail, 503-226-5090. We will share your thoughts on all that on Monday. Well, now we're to the end of the show. Thanks so much for watching, and remember, the story, our story, that never ends. Stick around now for a peek ahead to the weekend forecast during the news at 6:30, and enjoy your weekend. I'll see you on Monday.